think for me, democracy it brings a lot of things to mind initially, but first, I think the first thing I thought of, and the first thing I think of when I think about democracy is access. Whether that's access to political input, whether that's access to services provided by a city or a municipality or a government. But the idea behind democracy to me is that everyone within that democracy will have access to certain services, and there won't be discrimination in a person's ability to get access to services that are provided by the state, by the government, whatever the local government that we're dealing with, all the way up to the federal government. The forms of democracy that have evolved, at least in our country, have maybe continually evolved away from what I perceive to be democracy, or what I would hope some ideal would be centered around access. In that, obviously, there are many government-related programs and initiatives that don't have open access, that are failing in some way. And I also think that the other piece of it that has meaning to me is from a purely political sense. In other words, when compared with a monarchy, or with anarchy, or with an aristocracy, or in a very political sense, democracy to me means a form of government where the people have a voice and they have access. Whether we're doing that, I think where it gets confusing for me is that I see many different institutions that are state-sponsored, federally sponsored, that are supposed to have access and are supposed to be controlled by the people, and they're not. And I think the final thing where it applies to me is, as somebody who studies the Constitution and teaches criminal procedure, and looks at founding fathers, I tend to go back and look at, from a constructionist perspective of the Constitution or a revisionist perspective of the Constitution, how those things play out in a democracy that was intended in 1789 versus the democracy that we have now. And I think that it's vastly different, and I think it's ever changing too.